Audiobook Academy Biography presents William Shakespeare. English poet William Shakespeare is often regarded as the greatest playwright of all time. Shakespeare's writings are revered around the world, yet little is known about the man himself. William Shakespeare, who was he? Shakespeare, William, was an English Renaissance poet, dramatist, and actor who lived and worked in the United Kingdom during the Renaissance period. He was a member of the King's Men troupe of actors from about 1594 until his death. His works have been acclaimed for more than 400 years, capturing a wide variety of human emotions and conflict. William Shakespeare's personal life, on the other hand, remains a mystery. Historians can get a sense of his life through two key sources. Official documents such as church and court records and Shakespeare's plays, poems, and sonnets make up one part of his legacy. These, on the other hand, just offer brief summaries of specific events in his life, offering us no real understanding of the man himself. Shakespeare's birth date is unknown. William Shakespeare was baptized at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon on April 26, 1564, according to an old church record. The date of Shakespeare's birth is widely accepted to be April 23, 1564, based on this information. About 100 miles northwest of London, Stratford-upon-Avon was a thriving market town on the banks of the Avon River, divided in two by a country road during Shakespeare's day. Family. John Shakespeare, a leather merchant, had 3 children with Mary Arden, a local heiress. Joan and Judith were Shakespeare's 2 older sisters, while Gilbert, Richard, and Edmund were his 3 younger brothers. Shakespeare's father was a successful trader who served as an alderman and bailiff, a position like mayor, before his son's birth. Records, on the other hand, show that towards the end of the 1570s, John's circumstances had deteriorated. Adolescence and learning. Almost nothing is known about Shakespeare's childhood or his education. Scholars believe he may have gone to the King's New School at Stratford, where he learned to read, write, and studied the classics. Shakespeare would have been eligible for free tuition as a child of a public official because of his parentage. However, some have raised doubts about the authorship of his work because of this confusion about his schooling, and even about whether or not Shakespeare really existed. Children and wife. On November 28, 1582, Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway in Worcester, Canterbury Province. An hour's drive west of Stratford, Hathaway grew up in Shottery, a quiet, rural community. Shakespeare was just 18 years old, while Anne was 26 and pregnant. On May 26, 1583, the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter they called Susanna. The twins Hamlet and Judith were born on February 2, 1585, exactly 2 years later. At the age of 11, Hamlet died of an unknown cause. Lost years of Shakespeare. After the birth of his twins in 1585, there are 7 years of Shakespeare's life where no records survive. What happened to him during these lost years is the subject of much debate among scholars. One possibility is that he went into hiding to avoid being caught poaching game from Sir Thomas Lucy, the nearby landowner. An assistant schoolmaster in Lancashire could also be his occupation. According to most historians, Shakespeare came to England in the mid to late 1580s. He is thought to have worked as a horse attendant in some of London's more prestigious theatres, which is a scenario that has been revived in modern times by countless aspiring actors and playwrights in Hollywood and Broadway. The Royal Guard. The Lord Chamberlain's Men, a London playing troupe with whom Shakespeare was affiliated for the majority of his career, had Shakespeare as a controlling partner as early as the 1590s, according to papers. The King's Men, the most prestigious group of its time, was renamed after King James I's coronation in 1603. The King's Men band had a lot of fans, according to reports. Shakespeare's works were published and sold as popular literature, according to historical records. Despite the fact that nobles in 16th-century England did not hold a particularly high regard for theatre, some of its patrons and performers have close relationships. Playwright and actor. According to historical records, Shakespeare was making a living in London as both an actor and a playwright by 1592, and at least one play of his was being staged there. There is an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you, and being an absolute Johannes factotum, is in his own conception the only Shake scene, wrote playwright Robert Greene in the September 20, 1592 edition of the Stationers' Register, a guild publication. It's not clear exactly what Greene was attempting to express, but scholars generally agree that Shakespeare was trying to match Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Nash, or even Greene himself in terms of education and fame. His first and second published works, Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece, were both dedicated to Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, who was a patron of Shakespeare's early career, 1594. It wasn't until 1597 that Shakespeare had completed 15 of his 37 plays and put them into print. He purchased the second largest mansion in Stratford, known as New House, for his family at this time, according to civil documents. He may have spent most of his time in London, composing and acting, and only returned to Stratford once a year during the 40-day Lenten period, when the theatres were closed. Globe Theatre. Globe Theatre was built by Shakespeare and his business associates in 1599, on the Thames River south bank. Shakespeare invested £440 in real estate in Stratford in 1605, and the property's value more than doubled, netting him £60 a year. Scholars say that these investments allowed him to compose his plays uninterrupted since they turned him into an entrepreneur and artist at the same time. Shakespeare's style of writing. As a result, Shakespeare's early plays were often written in a traditional style, with intricate metaphors and rhetorical words that did not always match the story's narrative or characters. As a result of this innovation, Shakespeare was able to free up the flow of words by modifying the customary manner to suit his own aims. Shakespeare utilized a metrical pattern consisting of lines of unrhymed iambic pentameter, or blank verse, to construct his plays with only a few minor deviations from it. However, there are sections in all of the plays that stray from this and employ poetry or simple prose. Plays by William Shakespeare. In the span of 2 decades, from 1590 to 1613, Shakespeare authored 37 plays, all of which revolved around one or more of the following: historical dramas, comedies, and tragic comedies. In the beginning, I wrote historical fiction and comedy. Shakespeare's earlier plays, with the exception of Romeo and Juliet, were primarily history. According to dramatists who have studied Shakespeare's plays, the Tudor dynasty's origin may be traced to Henry VI, Part 1, 2, and 3, Richard II, Part 1, 2, and 3, and Henry V. At a period when England's aging ruler, Queen Elizabeth I, had no legitimate heir, the depiction of instability in Roman politics in Julius Caesar may have resonated with viewers, creating the prospect for future power conflicts. Shakespeare's early comedies include A Midsummer Night's Dream, Merchant of Venice, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, and Twelfth Night. Titus Andronicus, The Comedy of Errors, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Taming of the Shrew, Love's Labour's Lost, King John, The Merry Wives of Windsor, and Henry V are just a few of the plays that were written before the year of 1600. Dramas and tragicomedies written after 1600. After 1600, Shakespeare penned the dramas Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Shakespeare's characters provide timeless and universal depictions of human temperament throughout these works. Shakespeare's Hamlet, which deals with treachery, vengeance, incest, and moral failure, is probably the most well-known of these plays. Shakespeare's storyline twists and turns are generally driven by the hero's moral failings, which often destroy the hero and those he loves. Several tragic comedies were written by Shakespeare in his later years. Shakespeare's Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest are 3 such works. They are darker than the comedies, but not as gloomy as King Lear or Macbeth because they end in reconciliation and forgiveness. All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Timon of Athens, Coriolanus, Pericles, and Henry VIII were all penned during this time period. Some experts believe that Shakespeare's death on his 52nd birthday, April 23, 1616, is a hoax. On April 25, 1616, he was buried in Trinity Church, according to church records. Many people assume Shakespeare died after a brief illness, although no one knows for sure. To his eldest daughter Susanna he bequeathed most of his wealth in his will. The second best bed that he left to his wife, Anne, appears to have gone largely unappreciated. This has sparked rumors that she was no longer popular or that she and her boyfriend were no longer close. In any case, there isn't much indication that the couple had a rocky marriage. Second best bed generally refers to the master and mistress's marriage bed, whereas first best beds were reserved for guests, according to other experts. Is Shakespeare the author of his own plays? Questions developed about Shakespeare's authorship roughly 150 years after his death. Some academics and literary critics began to float the names of Christopher Marlowe, Edward de Vere, and Francis Bacon as the genuine authors of Shakespeare's plays. These men had better-known backgrounds, literary credentials, or sources of inspiration than the unknown Shakespeare. In part, this was due to a lack of information about Shakespeare's life and the scarcity of original materials from his time period. No official records from the Stratford administration or the Holy Trinity Church indicate that Shakespeare was an actor or playwright. Shakespeare's critics also questioned how anybody with such a low education could produce works with such intellectual insight and poetic power. There have been a number of groups that contest the legitimacy of Shakespeare's works over the years. In the 19th century, when Shakespearean devotion was at its peak, the most serious and vehement skepticism arose. Critics argued that the sole proof of Shakespeare's existence came from the story of a poor young man who married early and went on to be wealthy in real estate. There are others who believe that the 17th Earl of Oxford, an English aristocrat and poet, was the real William Shakespeare, according to the Shakespeare-Oxford Society, which was established in 1957. Aristocratic knowledge, education, and structural parallels between De Vere's poetry and Shakespeare's works are cited by Oxfordians as evidence for the authorship of De Vere's writings. According to critics, Shakespeare was not educated or trained in the art of writing elegant prose or creating well-developed characters. Many experts believe that Shakespeare wrote all of his own plays, though. It's important to remember that other playwrights of the era came from low beginnings and had questionable histories as well. They believe that the Latin and classics taught at Stratford's New Grammar School would have prepared future literary greats. It is argued by those who believe Shakespeare wrote his works that there is no proof that Shakespeare ever lived. He is named in the title pages of published poems and plays, according to the evidence. It is possible to find evidence that authors and critics of the time recognized Shakespeare's work in plays like The Two Gentlemen of Verona and The Comedy of Errors. The court of King James I acknowledged Shakespeare as a groom of the chamber and a member of the King's Men Theatre Company in 1601 when the group presented 7 of Shakespeare's plays. According to those who knew Shakespeare both as an actor and author, there is significant circumstantial evidence of personal interactions. Legacy. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, Shakespeare was a well-respected playwright and actor who authored and appeared in plays. However, it wasn't until the late 1800s that his talents as a dramatic genius were fully appreciated. As early as the Romantic era in the early 1800s and into the Victorian era, Shakespearean admiration and veneration reached its peak. New scholarly and performing arts movements have rediscovered and adapted his works in the 20th century. Since his death, his works have been widely researched and staged across many cultural and political settings. One of Shakespeare's greatest strengths is his ability to create people and stories that are universally relatable despite their historical setting in Elizabethan England. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.